Chuka Umunna, welcome to Acting Prime Minister.
Thank you for having me on your podcast.
Thanks for having me on the podcast in quite an extraordinary week. It looks like there might actually be a vacancy for Prime Minister at some point fairly soon.
Who knows? I think the thing is, though, Boris Johnson's idol clearly is President Trump. That's who he's modelling himself on. And like Boris, President Trump isn't averse to saying and giving a cast iron guarantee about one thing one day and then taking a completely reversed position the other day, or just basically lying. And that is something that Boris Johnson does a lot. And, you know, as a London MP, I just think of his commitment to, you know, stand in front of the bulldozers if there was an attempt to build the third runway at Heathrow. Along comes that issue. He's an MP that is part of a government that prosecutes that policy. I don't see him standing in front of any bulldozers anymore.
He says he's going to die in a ditch now and make sure we leave on October the 31st.
But I think if you lay in front of a bulldozer, you're probably likely to die as well. I mean, he's already broken that one. So I don't think you can really trust a word that this guy says.
But the Lib Dems have been gaining MPs this week almost as fast as the Tories have been losing MPs. It's been quite an incredible week for your new party, and it must be quite nice for you to have Luciana Berger back in the fold, for example. Obviously, an MP that you shared two other parties with now.
Yeah. Well, no, look, I think that we're seeing a reconfiguration of British politics at the moment. 20th century politics in the UK was characterised by two big main parties, one representing the interests of Labour, the other the interests of capital. And that just is not the way that our politics really plays out anymore. And it isn't the way that Britain is built. You know, there are lots of working people who have lots of capital. They invest in shares, they own, businesses, lots of business. Yeah, a lot of business owners who are the only employee in their business. So that is just not how Britain is organised anymore. But you've got an old 20th century politics which still exists, which is clearly broken and can't deliver. I think now we've got a politics that is driven much more by people's values, whether you are open, internationalistic, or more closed, more nationalistic, whether you're socially liberal or socially conservative. And we can see that those things are driving voting behaviour more than any other. And, you know, the labels that tend to be given to it is Remain and Leave, but it's characteristic of something more than that. And that's why the Liberal Democrats are thriving now, because I think for a lot of people, they didn't quite know what we were. And what Brexit has done is actually shine a light on the values that lie behind the party, and in a kind of much more liberal, open, nationalistic, conservative dichotomy, it's a lot easier for us to flourish. And people who share those values are just flocking to the party like never before. It also helps that we have an incredibly modern, engaging, inspiring leader in Jo Swinson, who is symbolic of what Britain is today. It isn't a kind of throwback to the Britain of yesterday.
Okay, well, let's get the Lib Dems all the way over the line today. Let's imagine we do have our first ever Liberal Democrat Prime Minister. So you're going to walk through that door of number 10, and a few trivialities to sort out first. So you sit down at the desk and you're unpacking your boxes. What would be the picture, do you think, that you'd hang on the wall?
Well, you know, actually, the first thing that you do as Prime Minister, and I know this because I worked on the first official biography of John Major after he stopped being the Prime Minister.
Right.
Anthony Seldon, who's the educationist but also historian, used to teach me politics, and so I worked on that book shortly after leaving school. And the first thing you do when you become Prime Minister is you sit at the cabinet table, you're left on your own, you give them a piece of paper and you write in your own handwriting a letter to the captains of Trident, instructing them what to do if Britain is blown up. And I do think we should have a deterrent. So I'd hope, as Prime Minister, I would actually do that. Whereas I think if it was Jeremy Corbyn, it'd probably be another thing altogether, because it's important that we protect our country and keep ourselves safe.
Sure.
So that probably would be the first thing. But you were going to ask me.
Picture on the wall. I'm trying to get a bit personal, Chuka. I'm trying to understand what motivates you and who inspires you. You can have anyone. It can be a personal picture. It could be maybe a leader that you find inspiring.
Martin Luther King.
Okay. Good answer.
Greatest orator of the last century, easily for me. And he laid down his life for his values and his beliefs. He was a champion of liberal values, and actually so many of the battles that he and the civil rights movements across the world won, which we took for granted, frankly, up until the last few years, have come back into view. And we have seen a challenge to, important liberal values that we thought, were no longer an issue or contested like never before. And we've got to fight for them now. So I think having him over your shoulder, reminding you what this is all about, is important. So I put him up on the wall.
And it's going to be a stressful time because we're assuming Brexit wouldn't be resolved at this point. You're probably going to have to work round the clock on your first night. What is the drink that you would reach for, do you think, to kind of calm those nerves? What's your favourite tipple?
I'd have a Glenmorangie on the rocks with a little bit of water.
Nice. Nice. And what about a takeaway to go with it? What's your favourite takeaway?
Oh God, that'll be telling. It'd probably be Domino's, actually. Domino's
I don't know where the Domino's goes with.
Or a burger.
All right, look.
And I'm not necessarily recommending that as a kind of staple source of food for your diet. But look, you know
Health
what?
warning.
With these election campaigns, my first election campaign in 2010, I lost 1.5 stone during that campaign.
Really?
Yeah, and it wasn't like I stopped eating. It's just like you're just running on adrenaline.
Yeah.
And you're marching up and down the streets constantly, all day, every day.
A lot of people think that you might always have wanted to be Prime Minister. They think that you're quite ambitious. Have you wanted to be Prime Minister?
I think any MP that says to you that they wouldn't want to be Prime Minister is probably lying, because it is the one position in politics where you can actually change millions of people's lives. But in a way, so at one point, yes, I definitely did, because I wanted to lead a party, and you don't want to lead a party unless it can win. But in a way, since then, it's been a huge liberation not really having that as an issue. And I've kind of gone full circle in a way, which is that when I first started contemplating whether I could actually be an MP, people forget that if you're of my background, certainly when I was growing up, there were hardly any people of colour in this place, and the idea that you would be on the green benches was just not something you could really contemplate. But I'd always wanted to be a cabinet minister in a progressive government, because that is the way that you can really make great change. And there have been, you don't only do that as Prime Minister, there have been great parliamentarians who've made huge change. And Aaron Bavan, who founded the Health Service, is a good example.
Yeah, of course.
Who didn't reach that height. But I think the key thing is when I have a lot of young people come up to me and say, look, I want to be an MP, how do I do this? What do I do? I say, you're actually asking yourself the wrong question. The first question you should be asking is, what do you believe in?
Yeah.
And how do you think we need to change our country? And then that drives what you do politically. You don't go to being an MP first and then kind of working out what you want to do after. It has to be your desire to actually change the country and improve your community first.
Is that kind of liberating for you then, in a sense? Because if you have had you are ambitious, and if you have had these ambitions before to be at the top of politics, now, as you say yourself, having left the Labour Party and you're unlikely in a position to be Prime Minister in the near term, is it quite liberating to just be able to focus on what you actually believe in?
Yes.
You don't have to follow
That's
really awkward party lines and things.
Yeah. I think the other thing actually that is underestimated is actually, certainly in the UK with our parliamentary system, it is a team sport. And, if you say, look at the 1997 New Labour government, although, politics was becoming very presidential then with Tony Blair, there was a phalanx of big figures around him who were what New Labour was. It wasn't just Tony Blair, it was Gordon Brown, it was Robin Cook, it was John Prescott, it was David Blunkett, it was Jack Straw. It was these big recognisable figures who made New Labour what it was. Yeah. And this is one of the issues I think that Boris Johnson is going to find, is that he's trying to do a Donald Trump. He's trying to be presidential. He thought that he could do the job of Prime Minister as the chair, almost like a monarch surfing above the fray, and leave the hard detail work to a bunch of chief executives. I know that because some people very, very close to him have told me that is his conception of what it is to be Prime Minister, and that's how he intended to do this job. But I think the problem is that you are the chief executive as Prime Minister, and it is a team sport, and he's in the process, frankly, of smashing up his team, or certainly getting rid of at least half of what people thought was the conservative tradition, the one nation Disraeli Tory tradition. So I think he's going to come a cropper. Mm-hmm. He already is.
Talking of coming a cropper, when you look back on this year, I mean, it's tricky, isn't it? You left Labour to join Change UK, then you left Change UK, then you joined the Lib Dems. I mean, some people would say that this year's been a little bit messy. How do you reflect on it? Do you feel as if it's been a bit messy?
Who in politics has it not been messy for? I mean, politics is a mess. And I think what people in the Westminster bubble are still coming to terms with is that we are shifting, like I said, from the left, right, Tory, Labour story to something that is much more open, closed, conservative or liberal. And the common thread with me has been that, people who were kind of, you maybe flicker on the radar for them, has been this guy's anti-Brexit, he thinks it's terrible, he's an internationalist, and that is the common thread through everything that I've done. So if you accept that that is how politics operates now, then to a lot of people, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, a lot of people in the constituency I represent, in Streatham that I grew up in, they've been on the same journey. So in 2017, a majority of people in my constituency voted for me as the Labour candidate. I got a much higher share of the vote than my neighbour Kate Hoey because of my strong Remain credentials. Yeah. And then what did the majority of my constituents do in 2019 in the European elections? The majority of them voted for the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, or Change, but mostly the Liberal Democrats. So they've kind of been on that journey. So I think for people outside politics who are not tribal and stuck in that kind of 20th century way of thinking about things, this isn't really a surprise to them. And I get a lot of people say to me, you're remarkably relaxed about A, what's gone on, and B, when people put these things to you, you're just kind of like, as water off a duck's back. And for me, it's kind of like, look, I've always been driven by the values. But
there was this tweet that you put out there saying you'd never join the Lib Dems. I mean, people are just kind of accusing you of flip-flopping, really.
This is the problem with the populist right and left. They love their fake news. That wasn't a tweet that I put out. So that was a fake tweet which was cooked up, I'm presuming, by Corbynistas who seem to have a visceral dislike and a really distasteful, nasty way of behaving towards the new Lib Dem leader, Jo Swinson. But I never said that. And actually, I wouldn't have said that, not least because the first political party I ever joined was the Liberal Democrats. I was a member of the Liberal Democrats briefly for a year before I was kind of swept up by the New Labour phenomenon.
We spoke to Anna Soubry on this podcast before the summer break, and she's really upset with you, actually.
I know. But look, what we've all been through has been incredibly difficult.
Have you spoken to Anna, though? Have you spoken to her?
Yeah, we have spoken. I mean, I'm not going to go into the details of it, but...
Have you apologised to her? Because she, the reason she was upset was that she says you didn't tell her that you were leaving Change UK.
Like I said, I'm not going into that because that her version of events is out there. I have a different kind of story to tell about what happened and how people spoke, but that really isn't the issue here. The real issue here was whether or not you think that there is space for a new progressive Liberal Party in British politics. And the conclusion that I came to, and I was very open and honest about this with those who chose to stay in Change UK, was that there is not room in a parliamentary system to do what we were trying to do, which was to create a new party. You can do it in a presidential system. I just do not believe that you can do it in a parliamentary system. And I didn't believe that Change UK, given we tested that proposition at the European elections, should be seeking to carry on with that proposition in a general election. And there was just a difference in views in that. But in terms of the stuff around it, when people spoke to each other and all that, I'm not going to go into it because I have a different story on that. And I'm not sure it's particularly productive. But it's when you go through what we all went through, you're going to have this. And it is, it's difficult. It's not straightforward that way.
Do you regret, though, that your friendship with Anna sort of broke down over it? Because you were great. I mean, she thought you were going to be Prime Minister. She really thought you could be a great Prime Minister.
And I have huge affection for Anna. I think she is an incredible politician, incredibly bold, courageous. She's literally put herself on the line for what she believes in. And I still consider all of them to be friends. But, when you go through these things, people sometimes, we're not all robots, we're all human. And when you go through the tumult that we've gone through, collectively, all of us who left the Labour and Conservative parties at the beginning of this year, then these things are going to happen, and it's not going to be easy and straightforward. And I just say to people from the outside looking in, it just illustrates that we are human beings as well.
Mm-hmm. Just one last question on this, because the other thing Anna said to us was that she was hopeful you'd be the leader of Change UK, and then you didn't go for it. Why didn't you put yourself forward?
Because we weren't appointing a permanent leader. So this is always the problem that Change had, is that in the end we were hoping to form a political party now, towards the end of the year. Look how much has happened since February.
Because the European elections happened when we weren't expecting them to happen. You guys were pushed into having to get yourself organised very quickly.
And at that point we were very concerned to keep an even balance between those coming into the project, the party from the centre-left and the centre-right. And at the time, before we had a leader, we had a spokesperson in me who was ex-Labour, we had a convener who was ex-Labour, and we felt that with the leader, we needed to balance that out, certainly in the short term. And remember, this was at a time that we were hoping to attract in more people from the two main parties. And that, clearly didn't happen. But this is one of the reasons I did, and I'm not sure, for the value that we're seeking to promote and the goal in the short term that we want to achieve, which is to stop Brexit, I'm just not sure how going over this stuff is really going to assist our cause.
Okay, let's look forward then.
Yes.
You're Prime Minister now anyway, so you can do whatever you want. You've got to make your first speech. What do you think is the sort of personal anecdote that you might draw on that sums up your politics and what drives you? You've talked a bit about what you believe in, but where does it come from? What is it that drives you in politics?
Well, let me take why does this Brexit issue matter so much to me? And why do I really care about it? And it goes way beyond, the negative economic impact of Brexit on the economy, how it will compromise our status on the world stage, potentially pose challenges to our ability to keep our country secure and the rest of it. The long and the short of it is, look, I am half Nigerian, a quarter Irish and a quarter English. My sister is married to an incredible Danish doctor. I have a Danish niece and nephew who all live in Copenhagen. There's a whole Irish part of my family here and in the Republic. I have cousins in Spain. I have a French aunt who lives in this country and has done so for over 40 years and has to apply for settled status. So this Brexit thing, it isn't just like a functional, instrumental thing. It goes to my family's identity and who we are. We are British and European, and we're bloody proud of it. And how dare these people try and strip us of our identity? I've just come back recently from Italy. I did a short break in Cornwall at the beginning of the summer, but we went for another break in Italy. And I was going through the queue, coming back in at Stansted, and looking at the EEA, EUQ, and all other passports. And I thought, how dare these people make me walk through a different queue? And I was going through with my daughter, and I thought, how dare you rob her of the opportunities and of the ability to travel freely, live and work in the EU that previous generations have taken for granted. And so I am a product of what it is to be liberal, open, internationalistic, forward-thinking, embracing, engaging with the future. And that is ultimately the set of values that I hold. It's what I think modern Britain is about.
Do you think
but
people almost have to be
challenging that right now?
And do you think people almost have to be apologetic for that now?
No.
Because it's not fashionable anymore, is it?
It is fashionable.
Is it?
I think it is. But we have people on the populist left and the populist right who are challenging it. And somehow we've allowed ourselves to be cowed by it. And in a way, if there's one good thing that the Brexit vote has done, it's awaken the liberal, progressive thing being in every person and enable people to realise what they really are, and that you can't take it for granted that that's how our country is going to be organised.
But why do you think there is this backlash against it? Because you must feel it. You're a member of a minority. I'm a member of a minority. I certainly noticed there's a lot more disquiet.
Do you know what I think it is?
About progressive politics. People feel as if, for one reason or another, maybe liberal politics went too far and that they were robbed of something.
I say there's two things about it, particularly on the right, but also on the left. Different minority groups, the LGBT plus community, different ethnic minorities. It's easy to say, well, you see those guys, people like us from those different communities, The reason that this globalisation thing is shafting you is because, frankly, they've been given more of a look in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's our job to challenge that and expose it for what it is, which is, frankly, xenophobia, prejudice and the rest of it. And I'm not sure I'm not saying that everyone who's sucked into that and says voting for the Brexit Party is a racist or is a homophobe, right? But what I am saying is that you can see how seductive that argument is. Your lot is screwed because those guys are getting a look in now. And we have to challenge that. So I think there's a lot of that going on. And I think the second thing that I would say is we looked at this when I sat on the Home Affairs Select Committee. Is there actually more prejudice and hatred out there? And what our finding is that there isn't necessarily. But the issue is that those people who have those views and thoughts have been emboldened by what has been going on to go and say and do things that they weren't before. And you see that, for example, in the Labour Party, with, there's always been a latent anti-Semitism on the left, and with the advent of Jeremy Corbyn, those people felt more able to be expressive of those abhorrent and disgusting views. And equally, when you saw the Vote Leave campaign, for example, putting out stuff saying if you vote to stay in the European Union, we're going to have millions of Turkish people coming over here who, by the way, are more criminal than others. And that emboldens people who have those prejudices to go out and say the disgusting, terrible things that they do. But that doesn't mean that that's where the majority opinion lies.
Okay, well, you're going to probably get a chance to fight for your opinion fairly soon in the general election. One is almost certainly coming. And you have announced today that you are going to swap seats, aren't you?
Well, swap is kind of not really the word because, in the end it's the people who decide. But I'm going to be standing in the cities of London and Westminster.
Have you been selected as Lib Dem candidate?
I've been appointed, yeah.
Yeah,
been appointed
okay,
as the candidate there. And look, this is a huge battle and highly symbolic. This part of London, central London, the cities of London and Westminster, not only is it a strongly Remain community, very much like my family, international. I know it well. I worked here for the best part of a decade for businesses. Almost all my clients were in this constituency. And so it's one of the things that has made me even more passionate about the European cause, because I can see just how devastating leaving the European Union is going to be for so many of those businesses. And we've got the city in part of this community, the biggest financial centre in Europe, which is going to be, everybody knows, will be adversely affected by this. And then, of course, in the west of the West London part of the constituent West End, we've got some of the most incredible creative industries, tourism and the rest, which is also stands to be here. And I know that because I worked for, like I said, loads of businesses in those different sectors. And what we hear, the Westminster and Cities of London Liberal Democrats, time and time again from residents, is they do not believe they have a representative that is true to the international liberal open global values of which this community is an international symbol. And they want to be represented by a party and MP that embodies those things. And, it really is taking it to Boris Johnson's doorstep. He currently lives in the constituency in number 10.
It covers Downing Street.
It does.
Do you think the Lib Dems can win it?
Absolutely. So in the European elections, in both of the boroughs, which almost entirely cover actually the constituency, the City of London and Westminster, the Liberal Democrats got more than the Conservatives and Labour combined. So we got in Westminster 33% of the vote, in the City of London, which brings in the Barbican and all that, we got 40% of the vote. And on current polling, it is an absolute two-horse race between us and the Tories here. We're going to go for it.
Do you think people might look at you though and say you're being a bit of an opportunist? You've left Streatham because you can't win there, and you've come over to Cities of London.
Well, I would just say, let's just look at the evidence, right? Based on history, you don't leave one of the two main parties if you are looking to be opportunistic, because history would say that you may not have a good chance of continuing to be a Member of Parliament. And I am not coming into a Liberal Democrat safe seat. I'm coming in to fight a seat where we are challenging the Tories. So I'm not sure this opportunism label, based on the evidence, is well made.
But you are leaving a seat where you definitely couldn't win as a Lib Dem.
Completely disagree. In seven of the 8 wards, we comfortably won in Streatham. We've got a fantastic candidate. We already had a fantastic candidate there when I arrived. It was, to be clear, it's my decision to stand in the cities of London and Westminster. But Helen Thompson, she's an ex-civil servant, partly left government in disgust at what was happening on Brexit, works for an NGO and works with refugees, lives in the constituency, and she, led a campaign this year which saw the Liberal Democrats win there. Look, the issue in Streatham is going to be who can you trust to promote the Remain cause? It's called the highest Remain vote in the country.
Yeah.
And in Helen Thompson, you've got somebody who will do that.
Okay. You don't need to promote Helen anymore.
The point is for us is, look, more generally, what does this say about the Liberal Democrats? Yes, we want to be taking seats from the Labour Party, but currently the biggest party in the House of Commons are the Conservatives, and it's also absolutely vital that we're taking seats from them. And frankly, if we're not taking a seat like the cities of London and Westminster in an election like this, which will be a Remain-Leave election, then we're not going to be very successful. So I am absolutely determined that we do this.
Talking about the wider politics of that election, do you think that it is necessary to have some kind of Remain alliance? Because I suppose one of the lessons from the European elections was that the Remain vote was split in many different ways. Would you like to see, even if it's just sort of localised pacts, maybe you guys standing down in rock-solid Labour Tory marginals, they stand down for you maybe in the southwest?
Well, I think we've said, look, we're very open to these arrangements at a local level. The culture of our party is that we don't just do things from above and impose things. Our local parties have a huge say and are very much consulted in everything that we do. And obviously we had a Remain Alliance arrangement in Brecon and Radnorshire, which was very important. The Greens and Plaid stood down for us there, which obviously made a difference. I think where you've got like a clear Remain choice and a challenger, then it makes sense for, if we can come to these kinds of arrangements, to be backing the primary challenger. But I think, it's hard to have like a uniform policy on that, in the sense of it. Local activists and the people who do the work they have to be very much part of that decision making.
Okay, your time's almost up now as Prime Minister, I'm afraid. I'll have to kick you out of Downing Street in a minute. So let's just do a quick fire round. Which country would you visit first as Prime Minister?
France.
Okay, any particular reason?
They're our nearest and biggest neighbour. They are, like us, one of the biggest economies in the world and one of the biggest military powers. We have a huge amount in common with them. They've always been a very important ally. So France first, and then Germany and the US.
Okay. I know you're a Liberal, but what's the first thing you'd ban as Prime Minister?
What's the first thing? Our first past the post system. I'd replace it with a system of proportional representation.
Interesting. How would you let off steam? How would you unwind as Prime Minister? What would you like to do?
Chill out with my family.
Okay. Because you've got a young child, haven't you? So,
I have, yeah.
Are you vain? Would you be a vain Prime Minister?
How do you define vanity? It's quite something to ask. Most people would say every politician's got a degree of vanity about them.
All right, that's a fair answer.
Will I stand in number 10 in front of the mirror and go, do I look wonderful today?
What would be your vice as Prime Minister?
Oh, God. I like naughty food.
Okay.
Rich, fatty, salty food. I'm terrible.
So not just Domino's gets worse?
No, really, I'm quite bad. I am quite bad, and as my team will tell you, I'm trying to have more fruit salads, more salad, reduce my fat intake, and just look after the arteries a bit more.
Good advice for everyone at this particularly fractious time in politics. Chuka Umunna, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Nice to see you. Thanks a lot. Cheers.